And good morning. We're live on YouTube and one of the Facebook channels, but one of the Facebook channels didn't want to play nice. So let's see if we can bring in Scott Kennedy Sports. I know we got some folks that watch and comment over there. We'll give it one chance, and otherwise we're going to say, never mind. So we'll see if that gets going. Welcome in, everybody. This is the Falcons Podcast. It is the first Monday of February. Is that what we're getting into? We flipped the calendar, and it is February 3rd. Yesterday was my dad's birthday. Groundhog's Day. Got to go to breakfast yesterday. Had a good day. And I don't remember, Nick, which is, if he sees a shadow, it means more winter, but it's going to be in the 70s today in the Southeast. So it's one of those days where you start off scraping some frost off your car, and then you're out in tennis shoes and shorts by the end of the day. So one of those fun days in Atlanta. How are you doing, my friend?
Well, Phil was it Puxatawny Phil? The name of the groundhog must have saw his shadow because we have potential snow in the forecast every day this week until Friday, and it's going to be low of 30, high of 38, which is pretty typical this time of year. Not really getting as much snow, but we haven't had much snow in the mountains here, and we need it. Anything to give it, the mountains like to have a big old blanket over the winter time, and gets everything green and hopefully prevents wildfires. So we need the cold and the rain out here. But other than that, doing well. Kind of dreading this week a little bit. I'm getting a year older, so whatever. Once you have a kid, I don't know if birthdays are not. They're just kind of a thing that happens if you're the guy. But it's whatever. I'm gonna meet up with some friends. It'll be good. And it's also the Super Bowl, which also dreading. I mean, this is probably close to the worst outcome. If you had to ask me which two teams I'd prefer the least to go to the Super Bowl, it might be these two teams. Now, luckily, the Eagles do have Cooper DeJean, who I really like, out of Iowa last season. He looks like a superstar. How he fell to the second round, I still don't understand. They also have Vic Fangio, who, Scott, you and I think, were Vic Fangio supporters for a lot of the Broncos stuff. It's like this team, he's stuck with Drew Lock, and they're not very good. Like, he's not a good head coach, but no. Not all on him. Still a good mind.
I wasn't a big fan of how he acted as a head coach. He was a petulant ass.
Yes.
As the head coach. I was saying it was weird. I felt like I was talking down. He's like, in his 60s. And I feel like I was watching a 33-year-old insecure Josh McDaniel up there at the podium. So not a big fan of Vic Fangio, but he does coach some good defenses. And no, I'm not really looking forward to the Super Bowl either. If there's something else going on, I might find myself doing it, since it seems like all the commercials leak anyway, and I'll just read about the Super Bowl. No, I mean, I'm sure we'll watch it. What else am I doing on Sunday evening besides podcasting? So, but we go live every Monday and Wednesday, and sometimes Friday, sometimes Thursday, like we went last Friday. Appreciate y'all joining me, because we like having the conversation with y'all. So we're going to say hello to some folks that came in nice and early, like Michael Ronquillo, the Ronk, coming in. He says, good morning, Scott and Nick on the Falcons podcast. Right back at you. And Edward Brown is kicking us off with a super chat. So breaking the ice with with a green super on YouTube. Thank you, Edward. He says, if the Falcons get their edge in the first round, did you see any cornerback prospects worthy of the 46th pick? Now, this is a little bit of a trick question. The skill guys don't typically go to the Senior Bowl. There's some there, obviously, but not the wide receivers. I was like, I can't remember if there's even the 5 years that I've been, if there's even been a first round wide receiver that's there. There aren't very many first round quarterback or running backs, period. So I'm sure I haven't seen a first round running back. Corners, every once in a while, you'll get a Quinyon Mitchell, but he wants to go because he went to Toledo. I haven't really watched the corners yet. I've been doing trenches. I went through quarterbacks and posted all the quarterbacks, and I've done the 1v1s for both teams, and I still have more of that to put up. One of the guys that definitely caught my, oh, that guy had a day like that for me was Louisville corner Quincy Riley. Now, I don't know if he is a second-round guy or not, but I know he had a good week. That's what I know, Nick, is he had a good week and helped himself, along with the other Louisville guy, Tyler Shuck, the quarterback. He was the best quarterback there. So the Louisville Cardinals showed out nicely.
Yeah, it's kind of begrudgingly for me because I despise their head coach. It's like a respect thing.
Who do they have now?
They have Brom.
Okay. I covered was it Brian, the first one?
Yeah, the son
was when he was coming through as a super recruit coming through.
Yeah, I believe that was his son. But Brom was. I mean, I don't know how much you follow Big Ten. You're not, you're really busy with the football stuff. But like Purdue is unbelievably horrible right now. he had Purdue in the Big Ten championship. So Brom is a unbelievable coach, and he just, no matter what, he figured out how to beat Iowa, it seemed like, every year. So he's doing a good job with Louisville. So I respect the heck out of him. Talking about corners, I think a cornerback you mentioned, Riley, Quincy Riley was voted the best cornerback amongst his peers in the game.
I didn't realize that. Okay. I mean, it's like, I always say this job doesn't feel hard to me. You just got to put in the work. It's like, who are you here to watch? I'm like, whoever stands out. Quincy Riley stood out.
Yeah, I thought he had a really good week. It's also it's easy, but it's also hard, Scott, because it's always the human factor, right? We only have the tip of the iceberg, what we can see, but like how they're going to mesh culture wise. If all of a sudden they've grown up too, like maybe they were immature in college and then it clicks for them. It is the human element, which always makes it chaotic. But other cornerbacks that I'm excited to hear from you about that maybe stood out for you. I saw somebody in the chat mention Darian Porter from Iowa State. He played wide receiver for Iowa State for a long time, but then switched over to cornerback, I think just 2 years ago. But he is 6'2", 79-inch wingspan, 200 pounds. And he, you talked about I listened to your show on Friday, Scott, as I was on my way to the doctor's office. But you mentioned the zebra technology measurements. I think Darian Porter was measured as the fastest defensive back at the Senior Bowl. I don't know if maybe even the fastest player, because cornerbacks can fly.
Yeah,
but he was up there.
Probably makes. I feel like there was a wide receiver that was sitting at number one, but either way, yeah, he was. Cornerbacks NFL cornerbacks are some of the best athletes in the world, any sport, period.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Also wanted to shout out. There's a few guys. I'm excited to hear I texted you, I think, on Thursday, like what you think about these cornerbacks. Darian Porter was one. Trey Amos from Ole Miss had a good week. He's somebody who's like right on the cusp of that first round discussion, it seems like.
The other one I like was your Florida State guy. I won't be able to pronounce his name. Azare Thomas.
He's another one who's on the cusp of the first round, in my opinion. Some people say he's going to go first round. Everybody's saying he's not getting out of the top 50. And also I wanted to give a shout out to Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky. He's one that he's smaller than I thought. I think he's going to fall to round 2 now. But I know Kuiper has liked him. And then finally, Mac McWilliams from UFC, I think, had a pretty good week as well. And if you're talking about slot guys, he's small at 5'8", 178. I don't love small players, Scott. I just don't. I'm sorry. But Upton Stout from Western Kentucky, tenacious, small slot guy coming in. I have a hard time with small players.
We're going to run a mock draft real quick at the end of the show. We'll do our first one, PFF mock draft. And I did one just to test it, see what it looked like before we went on. And I didn't necessarily get the corner because, I think edge corner, I'd love to see that happen if the board falls. But the way the board fell for me is I went Mykel Williams at 15, and then Jihad Campbell was there in the second at linebacker, which is a huge need. And if one of those game-changing linebackers is still there, I have no problem going linebacker. So I went Jihad Campbell. And then I don't know enough of the guys after that. I'd love to get a safety in the fourth, love to get a corner in the fourth. But one of the guys I do know who I saw down at the Senior Bowl, who was, 00, the UCLA kid, was Oluwafemi Oladejo, was there in the fourth. I'm like, I'll double up at edge. The hell with it. So I took him with the 4th round pick. So lots of good stuff. Terry Clark, good morning. Appreciate you being here. John Harrell, he says, good morning, Scott, Nick, and the Falcons family. Please give us your take. Absolutely. That's what we're here about. And Joseph Smith, here's the thing, Joseph, that it gives me pause on the defensive line in the draft. I'm excited about the defensive line in the draft too. He says, it's been so long, I can't remember the last time the Falcons picked a number 1 defensive player. AJ Terrell, that was the last one. He was the one that went, the last one that went number 1 in the first round. And then it's been all offensive skill. Cause I think, was he 2020? I think he was 2020. So it's been 4 straight offensive skill guys since then in the top 10. And you shouldn't be picking in the top 10 4 years in a row. That means something has gone wrong. And this, it's gotten better. You're 15. Like to see it 25 next year, somewhere in that neighborhood. But AJ Terrell was the last one. And the thing about being excited about the defensive line, Nick, you still need interior defensive line. Mm-hmm. Falcons went that way last year. You know, they traded a third round and traded up in the second to get Rucororo, and then went Brandon Dorlus, and then edge again. They still need edge. And Bralen Trice. They went Zion Logue too later on, but they didn't even roster him because they were deep enough on the defensive line. And real quick, then I want to pass it over. They still need edge because I think Onyemata's gone. Even if you have these three guys, if you have Grady Jarrett, Dorlus, and Rucororo as your three, you're still going to need somebody in that rotation within a year or two. Grady Jarrett isn't going to be around for long. One of the things I see, and then I'll hand it over, is people talking about Bralen Trice. Bralen Trice, I wasn't counting on him for much last year anyway. Third-round edge picks are they're scratch and sniffs. Maybe I can get it. I'm certainly not counting on Bralen Trice, third-round edge pick, coming off a season-ending injury in August, who's never played a snap in the NFL. That ain't the answer. If something happens with him, great. But you got to go edge this offseason.
Yeah, they need to add talent for sure. And I'm a big advocate of always, drafting defensive line, edge rusher in the top 100 every single year. And the Falcons have done that. It just feels like they haven't hit. So obviously at the end of the day, it's not just the position you take, it's the players you take as well. And we'll see, Scotty. And I know you mentioned you ran a mock earlier, and I look at the options at 15, and I'm finding the same thing at 20. I don't know if anybody's like truly palatable, or they're palatable, but nobody that feels like a slam dunk pick at 15. It feels like the first round grades this season are pretty slim up at the top. Some years you get 18, some years you get 8. Feels like it's 8. I do really love the 15 to 80 range of this class. I think there's a lot of good day 2 graded kind of guys, but I'll be curious as we progress through the offseason if anybody really starts to stand out for you at pick 15. Because right now I think go rack through my head and everybody's a but in that range.
And that's what there is we're going to talk about the NFL, Eric Edholm's NFL.com latest mock draft. And it's the biggest but guy on there in Shemar Stewart. That's what he took. And you can't say Shemar Stewart without saying but. And I'm like, man, that just scares the bejesus out of me. And Terry's following up with the good morning, Terry. Following up with the D-line talk. Says the Falcons are lucky the deepest position in the draft is D lineman. For me, it's more edge, though. You should be able to get a legit one, but you never know when we're on the clock. Absolutely. I like Walter Nolan, but do I like him at 15? Some of the other top guys, are they going to fall? Mason Graham, he's going top 5, is what it looks like. Walter Nolan on NFL Mock Draft Database is 26. That feels closer. Kenneth Grant at 19. So, but then you go to the edge group, and there's lots of edges, which means there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys in the top 32 at edge, which means there's going to be some busts in that group. If you hit one out of every 2 of those edge groups, 3 out of 6, there's going to be 3 first-round busts in that group of edges. That's just how it works, y'all.
Yeah.
And I'm more apt to say, give me the best football player. Just give me the best guy. Shemar Stewart scares the bejesus out of me. He had 4.5 sacks in 3 years at Texas A&M. Was handled pretty handily going up against offensive tackles down at the Senior Bowl. He just, Eric Edholm says, and here we'll just get into this one right now. With Judon and Carter set to free agency, a screaming need becomes even more necessary in Atlanta. Yeah, no kidding. Stewart isn't a true edge bender, but he's long, strong, athletically blessed pressure player to aid the front. Nobody says oh yeah, this guy's the difference maker. It's always because he hasn't been, Nick. He hasn't been a difference maker. It's always, man, he sure looks pretty and he's athletic. Maybe he can become something in the NFL. God, that scares the crap out of me.
Yeah, I feel like that way about every single edge you're going to talk about in this realm. I think right now there are 3 guys we can have a conversation with at 15, as you mentioned, Shemar Stewart, Mykel Williams, who I think is going to go beforehand. I know he's had the injury, Scott, but from what I've heard, it seems like people are like, yeah, he had the injury. He is unbelievably gifted, but he's somebody who's potentially there at 15. I'd imagine Atlanta's his floor. and then Mike Green as well. So, yeah, I don't know. And I'll have to get into some of the tape, Scott. From some of the reps I saw from Stewart, I thought he looked pretty good for his size, explosive. Yeah, like pretty good. And also going back to his Texas A&M tape, I'll be curious to see how he tests, obviously, and I'm afraid to fall in love with the testing as we get further and further away from the tape. But I wonder how much of it was the Texas A&M scheme as well, because I feel like a lot of it is he's not actually asked to attack. He's asked to displace and react. The term that I've heard from defensive line coaches is surfboarding. So you're kind of riding the offensive lineman above them, and then you're trying to make a play on the ball.
And make a play. Yes. Use your hands.
Exactly. And that itself is not going to lend itself to statistical output.
Then how stupid are you as a defensive coordinator to have those guys up front like that? You know, Nick Scourton, Shemar Stewart,
Walter Nolan before.
Not use them.
I mean, Texas A&M had the super recruit class and all this money, and they haven't made a playoff or anything, probably for a little bit for a reason, Scott. But you mentioned another one here, the reason that I'm trying to pluck it and just trying to figure out things. And maybe, again, it's draft season, so you always get way too in the weeds. But Scourton coming from Purdue, another Purdue shout out there. I did not think I'd have two in one episode. Had crazy stats at Purdue, really impactful. And he gets to Texas A&M, and it's not really. So I'm curious how much is the scheme with him. For me, with Stewart, you know, again, we talked about it at the top of the show. He's interesting enough for me at 15 in a down class. If the testing is there, I could take him at 15 if I'm sold on the person. It has to be like a carrot. Like he's like, this dude loves ball. Maybe he's not going to get it all together, but the athletic testing is unbelievable. That's somebody I take a chance on. If there's even a slight question about, you know, the intelligence, the work ethic, anything like that, it's like too much for me. But it's good if he's this test freak plus the football character, I think I'd be in. But it's hard.
For me, it's kind of like I look for in any walk of life is the motor. That's the one that's going to be the big one for me. You know, does he play? And to you said, does he love ball? You know, and you can tell by the motor. You know, you take some of these guys, Auburn running back Jarquez Hunter, for example. You can't get him off the field. This is the top 5 leading rusher of all time at Auburn University. Top like 3 or 4 in scrimmage yards all time. There's been some pretty good backs have come through Auburn. And the dude wants to play special teams. I mean, you can't get him off the field. He wants to be out there for everything. That's what I want to know that too. And that's a little bit tough. Minnesota Falcon, good to see you. You're probably pretty lonely up there. So glad you're able to find us when it comes to bird fans out there. He's like, but scraping frost in 70-degree weather is crazy. That's a sunny day for us in Minnesota. Yeah, we'll have frost in the morning here, and then it'll hit. It's like a high of 71 today. It's just one of those type of days where I'm in jeans and a long sleeve shirt. And as soon as this is over, I'm probably going to get on shorts and a t-shirt. And I was freezing. I put on a leather jacket to drive up to school this morning. So that was just one of those type of days. Troy Green, good morning. Hope you're doing well. Adam says, this is probably the first time I'm able to catch y'all live. Well, welcome in. Love that. And then Trenton says he's caught 3 live shows in a row. So he said, it's good to see you too, Trenton. And then for my Facebook family, hopefully some of y'all have been able to make it over. It wouldn't connect to one. Facebook is kind of nuts on this. Bobby, he talking about the edge class. He likes Pierce. James Pierce Jr. is my choice. And you know what's kind of the knock on him is it size? I've heard some of the lower base. All right, well we can get him squatting for goodness sakes. I remember that being said about a guy who was second in the NFL in sacks this year.
Yeah, it is size for him. He's pretty underdeveloped. I'll use in the lower half. So you're going to have questions about his ability to convert speed to power. I think he's more crafty and slippery and bendy than he is powerful. Not the heaviest hands in the world. And there's risk that he's more of a designated pass rusher. I think that's the concern there. Now, granted, on third down, on pass downs, he's going to have value. And you run such a rotation that I'm not like overly worried. If he's an elite pass rusher, then get it. But I think the big thing is there's some questions about projecting him as a 3-down player overall, and just like the variety of ways that he's won. And I mean, of late, especially with Jared Verse coming in, who are the guys that are winning pretty quickly out of the gate at edge? It's the guys with these Hulk hands. right? And that is not necessarily James Pierce's game. He's not overly powerful with his hands or converting speed to power.
I had a question on here, and I'm not sure who this person is. Was asked. Isaiah says, "What do you guys think about Jordan Burch at edge for Atlanta?" I don't even see Burch listed as an edge. I don't know who that is.
He is kind of a inside-outside guy that played. I think he's from Columbia, South Carolina. Was at South Carolina for a bit, and then transferred to Oregon. So he's one of those Oregon edges.
Okay, he's listed 71 on interior defensive line on NFL Mock Draft Database.
I think he's probably a 4-eye. He's kind of one of those guys who's like he played a pocket crunching defensive scheme, so they had him at edge. I think he was a pretty high recruit as well, and he had a pretty good year this season as well. He's one of the tossing in a pile. I mean, the day 2 defensive line options are insanity. There's so many. It's again like I'm all about day 2 this year. It's going to be
it's a good time to not have, but one day 2 pick, isn't it?
I mean, the Falcons probably should try to trade off 15, but who wants to come up? I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, it's he's somebody I project him more as a 4-eye, maybe some 3 technique. I have some questions about his ability to play low enough and handle double teams transferring inside full time, but he's definitely interesting and came on pretty strongly this season.
That's kind of how I feel about Stewart. You know, he's not an edge. He's not an outside linebacker at 285 pounds. He's a defensive end. You know, so and a Zach Harrison type with better. We'll probably test better than Zach Harrison, but Zach Harrison was out at edge for about 5 minutes when he got to Atlanta. And it's like, dude, he's not quick enough to be out there. Is this where he fits in? But I tell you what, I mean, the guy, and if you listen, you heard me talk about him. If all I know is Senior Bowl, and this is all I've seen, and this is all I'm ever going to see, that big edge that I really liked was Jared Ivey out of Ole Miss. He was wearing number 15. He came in he was actually even a little bit bigger than Shemar Stewart. He was 6'5" and 5/8, 283 pounds, 34-inch arms with a 6'10" wingspan. And he was moving people. He had some nice twitch to him. So that 275 plus end, if Ivey's in the second day 2, keep an eye on him. I liked him a lot of the guys that were there.
Yeah, Ivey, from what I saw at Ole Miss this season, again, we talked about it just a little bit ago, Scott, but heavy hands. Somebody who just the power that they have when they make contact is different than a lot of guys there. My understanding is that he is an A-plus character guy as well. I'll be curious. I think he's a little bit stiff in the lower body, Scott, so I don't think he's going to have the ability to stay at edge full time. If he does, it's going to be very base package oriented. But given how heavy his hands are, I think he has the ability to handle double teams, framed to even put on a few more pounds. I see him as a John Franklin Myers type for Denver, who played edge a lot for the Rams, then the Jets, and then moved into that 4-eye spot. And I think he can do that pretty well. Smart player, good hands. Again, not an incredible athlete, but from what I've heard, again, he's one of those football character guys that you want to take that you'd bet on.
Yeah, the rats. The guys, the football rats. I'm keeping an eye on some baseball guys like that this year. There's freshmen that made varsity. It made a swing varsity as a freshman. I'm like, yeah, he's a freaking rat. When I say that, I mean that with affection. That's what the Falcons need. Not only that, but somebody that can stay healthy. Obviously, they need a healthy Troy Anderson is what they need. And then linebacker is not really a need anymore, but you can't count on Troy Anderson going in next year. Was he played, started 4 games in the last 2 years? They need that type of athleticism with the ability, the availability on the field on there. One of the surprises, because Joe Dirt says, wouldn't surprise me if Fontenot drafts a tight end at 15 or even trade up and trade Pitts for a 6th-round pick. Fontenot's terrible at his job. Tyler Warren is projected in this draft. The mock draft I'm talking about today, I'll drop it in the chat real quick, is Eric Head Holmes from NFL.com, and he has Tyler Warren going 5 overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I can imagine new head coach Liam Cohen wanting to support Trevor Lawrence with a do-it-all threat at tight end, even if selecting Warren in the top 5 feels a tad rich to me. If you were to get Travis Kelce, not Travis Kelce, I'd go George Kittle more there. If you could get George Kittle at 22 years old for a number 5 overall pick and have him for the next 10 years, would you say that was a pick well spent?
Yeah, it would be. Tight ends are so hard because NFL teams are not good at evaluating the haves and the have-nots. Now, maybe that'll change here. And it's not that tight ends are not valuable, but I think it was, Austin Gale, who now works for The Ringer, did stuff at PFF for a while. But last year in the Brock Bowers discussion, he did a sample of the last decade of every single tight end drafted in the top 50. Not many go still at tight end, but that's a pretty good sample size over a long period. And I think like only 1 or 2 re-signed with their original team, and it was just littered with busts. So again, it's not that tight ends aren't valuable. It's just that I think the NFL has not done a good job of evaluating them. With that said, there are always outliers, and a lot of stuff that Tyler Warren does, I would say, is translatable for sure. I mean, he's a big player. He's improving as a blocker. And again, I'm really in the tight end niche right now, trying to figure out what makes them tick and trying to look at the ones who have succeeded recently. And 2 stats that over the last decade of the guys who have been great. It's not always, if you have this high stats, you're going to be great, but it feels like all the great ones have been good in these 2 categories: cumulative yak and missed tackles. Now, why would that be? Tight ends a lot. It's going to be not necessarily schemed up, but short area stuff with space against linebackers and making one guy miss. And that's when you get those explosive runs. So it's not necessarily routing guys up in space, the tight end that you want, or even always the contested catch stuff. It's when you get the ball, can you create after the catch and also make a guy miss? And those are the 2 areas that I look for. Warren does that really well. Colson Loveland, not so much, but Warren, the yak ability, making guys miss, just with power and stuff, he's up there. So he's interesting as heck. Warren
he's like Juggernaut. He always seems to be moving. He's not catching and like stopped and having to restart. They always seem to be getting the ball, whether it's quarterback scheme or him, just his ability is like, okay, I'm going to slow down and then accelerate through the ball. He always seems to be moving. And I absolutely love watching fullbacks and tight ends get loose in a secondary. It's diabolical to watch these 260-pound guys, these 190-pound, 200-pound guys trying to tackle them, and they get dragged along and along and along and just fires everything up. When we want to talk about, analytics, I've heard more and more people start to say this, but, one of the things you can't measure in analytics is emotion, momentum. It doesn't translate to math. And it's such a big thing to watch a player like that get just abusing people, physically abusing people, the whole place. It changes the entire tone of a game. Warren is like that. And Trenton says, I see it everywhere online that we go Warren from Penn State. Warren's not going to be there at 15. So
it feels like his floor right now is the Colts at 14.
14, like that's as low as he would go. And he was just mocked at 5.
Yeah, and Daniel Jeremiah had him.
But I wouldn't give up on Atlanta. I'd give up on the NFL. I'd start watching more baseball, Trenton.
Yeah, I mean, again, at the end of the day, you're not drafting generic players at positions. You're drafting individuals, and you want to make sure that you hit. It's more important to hit than to fill a need because, I mean, despite what's happened with Falcons the last decade, most teams operate in a sense where your needs fluctuate drastically every 2 years. So if you hit on the player, it doesn't matter, right? Like that's the big thing. I always come back to, I can't think of who it was, the Detroit Lions in, would have been 2007 or something. They had 2 pretty good defensive tackles sitting there on their team. And they're like, you know what? We have this guy named Aaron Donald in front of us right now, but we're going to go with Eric Ebron instead. And then Donald goes to the next pick. Well, we have 2 tackles there. Well, guess what? Draft good players.
No, at that level, again, when we talk about draft the best available prospect, that really means in the top 15. As far as it's an exponential curve of how good are these players, there's a drop off. The difference between 1 and 10 is exponentially more than the difference between 90 and 100. So, yeah, they're only separated by 10 spots, but it's an exponential curve in talent. Even once you get into the teens, it starts to flatten out some.
Yep.
When you got a chance to draft a guy, I don't like that. I don't care what else you have there. And nobody, obviously, Nick, I mean, part of this is hindsight grading.
Yeah.
Aaron Donald was awesome. We knew he was awesome. He went high for a reason, but nobody knew he's arguably the best defensive player of his generation, or he would have gone number 1 overall.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a little bit of hindsight in there, but still, to your point, really good first-round defensive tackle or tight end. That's easy. That should be an easy one. Red Swarm coming in.
Point just trying to drive home was that, at the end of the day, draft good players and it's going to work itself out. It's more important to hit stars than it is to fill a need. And the last, just to amplify your point about how the impact of players the further you get from one drops, just follow the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, like how much the first overall pick costs compared to the 10th compared to the 30th. Massive drop.
And then double it if there's a quarterback involved.
Yeah. Yep. It's different by year as well. You're absolutely right.
Red Swarm says, good morning, Scott and Nick, and all my friends in the chat. What impact do you fellas think that Bralen Trice can have coming back from a season missed due to injury? You're in a couple minutes late. We came in as we're talking about building this team. What can he have? I think he can be a rotational player who can take some snaps and hopefully be okay. What will he likely be? A redshirt year trying to get up to the speed of the NFL. My expectations for him in 2024 were 0. I had 0 expectations for a third-round edge. 0. Anything you get from them moving forward is good. It took D'Angelo Malone. D'Angelo Malone was a third-round edge. It took him 4 years to get on the field. And I liked Malone better at edge than I liked Dorless at edge coming out of the Senior Bowl. I wasn't a huge fan of Dorless. Dorless was a little bit of a tweener for me. Where I just didn't think. I'm sorry, Trice, Bralen Trice. I'm mixing those up. I didn't watch Trice as much as I watched Dorless. I was not a huge fan of Dorless, and I think Dorless went in the 4th. Okay, well that's fine.
Yeah,
apologies. Bralen Trice, 3rd-round edge, pretty productive in college, but if you're an instant impact type of edge, you're going in the 1st. You're going in the 1st. If you've got the height, weight, skills, and production, more like the height, weight, and speed, you're going in the 1st round.
Yeah.
If you take a guy in the 3rd at edge, you're hoping to get lucky. Mm-hmm. He was very unlucky. Now he's coming off an injury. So I consider 2025 to be a red shirt year. Anything you get from Bralen Trice is gravy.
Yeah, he's productive at Washington, but it didn't always feel translatable to me. Like you see like those quality sacks out there. But that's an area that he also didn't test very well. So again, as you mentioned, redshirt year, I think you're probably hoping that he's rotational, like your 3rd or 4th edge. Maybe by necessity, just where the position's at right now in your guys' room, he gets bumped up. But if you go into the draft with something in need, odds are you're coming out of the draft with it still a need, because typically draft picks are about the 2 to 3 year investment, not the instant impact. As we saw this last draft, sometimes it's a little bit more than others, but that's historically the trend.
The good news is on defense is you should be able to take your best available prospect and fill a need.
Yeah.
So those are the best drafts. It's like if I get an interior defensive lineman, will play next year because there's only 3 really. Orohiro, Grady Jarrett, and Dorless. I'll get it right this time. So the 4th one will come in and play. You'd think took 6 weeks for Orohiro to get in and play, and then it took 14 weeks for Dorless to play last year. You'd think linebacker will play, edge will play, safety will play, corner will play. There's big holes there. But Evan says the same thing. It's just not much coming off a torn ACL, and it wasn't just coming off a torn ACL. It was a torn ACL in September, in August. He's not even a year off of that. He wasn't exactly a quick twitch guy to begin with. So I don't have a whole lot of hopes. Anything you get from him, I think is just gravy. Dirty Bird Double X has been a viewer for a while. First time catching you live. Good morning to you. Good morning, everyone. That's all of y'all. AJ has a good question here, and it kind of goes with my Swanker asking about a safety too. He says, what are the odds the Falcons seriously consider Malachi Starks at 15 or even Nick Emenwari?
draft the best guy available. If you think one of those guys is the dude, that's fine. Safety is probably the most devalued position in all of the defensive side of the football right now. And you already do have a player with gravity out there in Jesse Bates, who's one of the 3 best in football. I don't think it's necessarily, if you draft the second one, he becomes exponentially better. I don't know how much gravity or a duplication process there is there. But at the end of the day, again, it's draft best player. Starks does seem to be slipping a little bit. He didn't have as good of a junior season. He's more of your back end player who can come down and do some slot and boundary stuff too, but he's very talented. I wish his tackling was a little bit better, but he's a good one. Amanawari is Scott, when you watch South Carolina this year, if you get a chance, it's crazy. Ole Miss and South Carolina had some defenses, dude. But Amanawari is obvious when you watch him because he's so big and moves so well for his size. It's kind of like when you have a guy who's going to be a future NFL player playing in high school, and it's like he's just, I hate to use the built different phrase, but he's built different. He just looks completely different than the guys out there. I've heard some people throw out Kyle Hamilton with him. I've heard Derwin James. I don't know if his instincts are quite there with Hamilton. I don't know if the overall power that Derwin James is there as well, but he's really interesting. And I do want to throw out a player as well. He's somebody that I think coming out of the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Scott, is getting a lot of discussion, a lot more hype coming out of him. That's Jahdae Barron out of Texas as well. I think Daniel Jeremiah had him in the top 10 of his big board. He had him going 14 overall or somewhere pretty high in his mock draft as well. And Jahdae Barron, he's more of the Swiss Army knife defensive back guy. And sometimes that's a bad thing, but I don't think it's a bad thing for Barron because it's more of that Brian Branch, Devin Witherspoon type that's been coming out where he's a safety, but he's also a slot. And he tackles really well. He's got insane ball production. So talking about safety, defensive back here, Falcons obviously need help at safety, but also nickel. I do want to give a shout out to Jahdae Barron from Texas, the Thorpe winner this season as well for the best defensive back. He's a really good one as well.
We're talking about going hindsight grading and going with the tight end and Eric Ebron over Aaron Donald, and it bring up what Terry Clark said. Terry says, kind of like when we took Drake London over Jalen Carter. I love Drake, but he ain't Jalen Carter. A number 1 wide receiver is as valuable, if not more, than a defensive tackle. Unless you end up with, an all-pro guy. The problem I had with Drake London was the Falcons needed so many pieces that there was a screaming need for a trade down in that spot. And there were some really good guys that we liked in that draft class in the second round, like George Pickens, Christian Watson, who is a dude, but he's had trouble staying healthy, Alec Pierce, and then Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Jamison Wilson all went the next 3 picks in a row. It's like that draft was screaming for a trade down. But if you hit on Drake London and he looks like a hit, then that was a good pick. That was a good pick. But it was Bijan Robinson that was taken over Jalen Carter, the running back. Bijan's great. He won't make in his entire career as much money as Jalen Carter is going to make in his next contract. As soon as Jalen Carter, assuming that if they stay on their same trajectory, an all-pro defensive tackle. And I would have taken Jalen Carter. I love Bijan Robinson, but again, I don't regrade by hindsight. Jalen Carter was the guy I would have taken there. There were some character concerns, but I felt pretty good about putting him into a room with Calais Campbell and Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata to be mentors. But to this point, a number 1 wide receiver is as valuable as a number 1 defensive tackle. But the running back that's a different discussion.
Yeah, Jalen Carter, we all know why he fell, right? Like he is involved in drag racing. There was a death in it, and he was kind of not in the best crowd at Georgia. So I think for Atlanta specifically, you did have good infrastructure here. We talked about that leading up to that draft, Scott. But there could have been worry about, some overlap with who he was running with if he goes over from Athens to Atlanta as well. So it's understandable with you're making that kind of investment in some of the background stuff with Carter, why you might be scary. Every single one of these guys is risk. Not to dehumanize them, but it's like investing in stock. He was a pretty volatile stock coming out of the draft, but had a chance to really hit. And he looks like he's going to hit. He looks like, honestly, Scott, he's got a chance to be the best interior defensive lineman in football. The way he's playing right now, he was
a definition of a high risk, high reward. Where Bijan Robinson was about as sure thing as you were going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I mean, I remember leading up to the draft the year prior when we were watching Jordan Davis, and I'm like, Scott, this Carter guy, he is freaking different. Like, this is like when the moves, the power, like this is what a superstar player looks like, and looks like it's translating to Philly as well. But again, there was risk, and it's easy to say in hindsight. It's kind of like also with Abdul Carter coming out of Penn State. Like, he had some seriously egregious things that he did when he. What did I say?
You said Abdul. Abdul seems okay. You were. It was Micah Parsons.
Micah Parsons. Excuse me. Yes, Micah Parsons coming out. He had some stuff that was like, ugh, and I knew for a fact he was off some teams' boards with some of the stuff. But immature, gets it together. I mean, guys with that amount of talent are going to get many chances, right or wrong. And he seems to have figured it out. But I mean, it's a process. It's easy to say in hindsight. But sometimes you have guys that just don't work out because of that stuff. With
Micah, I remember going, I roll my eyes at some of this stuff because everybody gets in trouble for something in today's day and age. Everybody's trying to get canceled. I'm like, what? Did he have a mean tweet or something? What? And then I went and read it. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is pretty heinous.
Yeah. And in that draft, Scott, we talked about Bijan Robinson, and somebody in the chat jogged my memory. Do you remember the guy that I definitely was banging the table for, and I think you were as well? It was Christian Gonzalez coming out of Oregon. Ends up going 12, 15, something like that. Looks really good his early rookie season, tears his ACL. And this season, Scott, what happens? I think he's an all-pro. I think he's an all-pro this year for the Patriots. So he
was good. And that was someone we talked at 8. Where could you go? But, we're going to move forward right now because Evan says, I don't know why we get excited about the draft. Terry Fontenot has proven his ineptitude over and over. By the way, he's about to go 0-9 on second contracts from his first draft. We'll see. Obviously Kyle Pitts wouldn't get one right now. So if we go to 2021, and here's the thing, it's like, oh, it was his first draft. I'm like, yeah, but you've been doing this for a long time, right? Yeah. The one that gets me is they took like 5 Senior Bowl guys, but didn't draft Spencer Brown. They drafted Jalen Mayfield instead. So the first draft, which is coming up on the second contracts, is Kyle Pitts. Richie Grant, he's a free agent, and he'll probably be on somebody's practice squad next year. I'll be a little surprised if he makes a 53 next year. Jalen Mayfield, forced into being a starter at guard, had never played guard. In fact, I think he only had 11 starts at Michigan in his college career. Darren Hall gone. Drew Dahlman is got the chance to was a really nice pick, and is going to get a very nice second contract. Taquan Graham, I really like. Ade Ogundeji, 5th round edge. It's not his fault. He wasn't very good. Forced into a starting position. Avery Williams has been good, and Frank Darby as a 6th round wide receiver was okay. But it was it's really the day 2 picks that have been the bane of the existence for Terry Fontenot. I mean, you look at that Richie Grant and Jalen Mayfield, that's bust at second and third, and knowing that what was out there. And again, I don't like to hindsight grade. I'm not going to go and pick the best player that was taken within the next 10 spots. So they should have taken this guy. No, that's hindsight. But Spencer Brown was my guy. We can go back and I'll say the best player in the draft. It's sitting right at the Senior Bowl. It's in the archives of my YouTube channel. And to take Jalen Mayfield was just silly.
And I definitely push back against you and Spencer Brown because his first couple of years in the league were pretty bad. He's been one of the storylines in the NFL this season, Scott. As far as like his first 2 years,
first year was good, and then he regressed a little bit.
His technique, his pass protection was pretty poor, but the athleticism and the tenacity he played with was always there. I'm like, this can be a 6 offensive lineman, obvious stuff, but whoever, I don't know who the Bills offensive line coach is, but he deserves a heck of a shout out. And because the Bills offensive line in general played pretty well this season. And he went from he got paid a decent contract after, was it last season? Because he started off, okay, he looks good. He still has the tools. And then this season he became one of the top 3 right tackles in football. But maybe that's high, but he was unbelievable this season.
But you're looking at it, at that position, you're looking at tools. That's exactly, I mean, and frankly, I've said it all the time. It's a bigger, faster, stronger league for the most part. Yeah, there's technique involved, but it's not like trying to field a grounder or hit a curveball, or even a clean jump shot where, little tiny tweaks make a huge difference. I mean, the closest I can think for technique is that's not even a good one. Is throwing motion, because either you've got it or you don't. And I can watch Phillip Rivers throw a football and still can't believe he's a quarterback. And
Maybe
Dan Marino throwing the ball out of flicking it out of his ear. You can't teach somebody like that. Bernie Kosar, some of these guys I grew up with these awful motions that were really good quarterbacks. So you look at a guy like Spencer Brown, who's 6'7" and change, 330 pounds, 500-pound bench press, and then goes through his pro day. And like my best comp for him would be LeBron James. He's probably going to be a pretty good player on a long enough timeline.
And the big thing also I think about Spencer Brown is that he's had the blessing of stability and infrastructure, right? The Bills have been very stable. And if you're on a team that's firing coaching staffs left and right, you maybe aren't getting to where you're at right now. But I mean his athletic testing
that with quarterbacks too. He wasn't very good. Who has been good at Cleveland? Who has been good with Carolina, with Jacksonville, Atlanta? We're one of those teams too, y'all, down here in the South. That is where we don't see a lot of guys come in and go off, and it's like, oh, then they become superstars. They were bad here, but they became superstars somewhere else. I'm going to hit this one real quick, and then we're just about to get out of here. 2 questions, because I want to hit Swanker again. Isaiah, good morning. Hope you're doing well. Staying warm out there till the sun comes and toasts us all up this afternoon. Says, what do you guys think Atlanta will do with Grady Jarrett and Onyemata? I think it's time to move on and let Rook cook and get a guy like Ty Robinson out of Nebraska to go next to him. I don't like Ty. Nope. It might be. He might be awesome. Again, I'll tell you what I think. I'm not going to tell you that I'm right. Ty Robinson looks stiff as a board to me. I would go other directions. I think you need to go defensive line here. Rook will be a major part of the rotation next year, but you need 4 defensive linemen. I think Onyemata's toast. They're going to save $8 million by moving on from him. I think they do a 1 or 2 year extension with Grady Jarrett to knock a huge chunk of money off of his salary cap and let him come back fully healthy. And I think he'll have a good year. Then we'll see 2026. But I think we got 2 more years of Grady Jarrett, and Rook, Dorless, Grady, and maybe a free agent or draft pick will be a 4-man rotation and get plenty of playing time this year. But I think Onyemata's gone. I don't think he was very good, and he's really expensive, and he's old. Those are strikes 1, 2, and 3 where 1 will get you cut, Nick.
I do think that there's going to be ample options in free agency on the interior defensive line this season, and I'll be curious to see what the market looks like because the draft is so deep as well. So you might be able to find some floor-raising stopgap guys who have the ability to surprise, kind of like what the Chargers had last season. Maybe it was 2 seasons ago, but last season with Poona Ford, who they did not pay a lot for, and he's like, oh, man, playing pretty great. It's still not a long-term superstar, but like you need – not every single guy in your – rotation at defensive line can be a superstar. You need 4 edges. You need 5 interior defensive linemen. They're all going to get snaps.
And the Falcons have done – Terry Fontenot's pro scouting department has done a really good job. It really has. Aside from Kirk Cousins, aside from that big iceberg, the cruise was great. It's done a really good job. Caden Ellis, hit. Jesse Bates, hit. David Onyemata was good for when you got him and what you paid him for. Hit. And then you get some smaller, some cheaper guys in there. What was Abdullah Anderson, interior defensive, LaCale London, Contavious Street. Those guys played well on the interior defensive line. I think Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod. These guys have come to Atlanta and done really well. The pro scouting department and the value that Terry Fontenot has gotten from free agents, I think, has been an A+. An A+. I'll pick nits at the draft, but I think his best attributes for the Atlanta Falcons has been the pro scouting department and free agency signings, except Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, not good on that one, and that one really hurts. But I know there's a little bit of dismay in the class in the chat about the draft and Terry Fontenot, but you can have bad process and still sometimes get lucky as well. So there's always a chance there, and it's always fun because no matter what, your team is going to get better.
Last question, unless we get any last minute super chats, and we're gonna call it a morning. My Swanker comes in. If Will Johnson drops, do you see the Falcons taking him at 15 or a trade down? They've never traded down. I love trade downs. This team needs more picks. I want a 3rd round pick or at least another 2 this year. So we'll see. I would love a trade down. But Will Johnson, who we've seen as high as top 5, Nick, his stock seems to be falling. There must be some chatter going on behind the scenes about Will Johnson, because in the latest mock draft, there was one last week where like the Falcons got Will Johnson at 15 and people are like, hey, what's he doing at 15? You're never going to get him at 15. Well, in the latest mock draft on NFL.com, the Pittsburgh Steelers take Will Johnson at 21. I don't believe Will Johnson is the top 10 lock some seem to think he is, with big corner facing injury and speed questions ahead of the combine, but a skill set could bolster Pittsburgh's secondary. Going to process and places where you can succeed. If I was a defensive player, boy, I'd love to go play for Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. I feel like that'd be good for my career.
Yeah, I mean, Will Johnson did not have as good of a season this year. He was all over the field in 2023, but this year had injuries and didn't really live up to it. Has really good coverage ability with good size as well, good length. I think he's pretty good technically. Some questions about the tackling and physicality despite the size there, so that's something to watch. But, I mean, I don't know, just the movement skills look really smooth for his size as well. I mean, the value in this class, I think, is probably day 2 for cornerback, round 2 specifically. I think there's a drop-off after that. There's going to be guys top 60 that really come off the board 40 to 60. I think you're going to see cornerbacks fly off.
Edge corner works for me. The Falcons didn't get contributors outside of Michael Penix, and Michael Penix wasn't supposed to be a contributor in this last draft. It was a draft for 2026, and that's fine. They need guys to come in and play. They should be able to get a starter, and you don't necessarily want that. It means you've got holes, but they should be able to get starters in the first round and the second round in this draft, whether it's some combination of safety, linebacker, edge, corner. You can take two of those positions in the first and second round, and they're plug and play starters, assuming you hit on your evaluations, Nick. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And next week we'll probably start to dive into free agency a little bit, because that's coming up quickly. Mm-hmm. And then and then the combine will be here, so we can start talking about the combine and taking the next level of evaluation. Yeah, I like Jared Ivey, but he ran a 5.1. Well, crap. So you want to take the eye test and say, yes, I'm interested. Now let's move forward in the evaluation process. So Senior Bowl for me was step 1, Nick.
It is. And also there's going to be a lot of, I mean, take it what you will. It's essentially the tabloids, but these people are rubbing elbows, and we're going to get more and more information from agents, personnel
more
people.
BS.
Yeah, more and more BS, but it's fun to follow. I mean, it was about a year ago where I think it was Diana Rossini coming out of the Super Bowl mentioned, keep an eye on the Falcons with Cousins. So a lot of talk going on in New Orleans this week, late at night. Had people hanging out, having a few too many drinks, loose lips, all that stuff. But yeah, we'll see what happens with this team. Again, Scott, I think the Falcons, we say this every year, but especially with your lack of picks and where it's at, ideally, I think this is a team that you're trying to trade back and get multiple picks in the top 100. But who's wanted to trade up and for what? If Ashton Jeanty falls to 15, maybe the Broncos are on the phone. I don't know. We'll see. But definitely
in this latest mock draft, Eric Jeanty, I think, goes 6.
Ashton
Jeanty goes 6. Pete Carroll blows up the draft. Why not? When everyone else is having trouble slotting Jeanty lower, I'll give him to the coach he was meant to play for. The Raiders at 6. And let us hear right from our own hearts. We are actually going to have let us pray. Right from our own hearts, we're actually going to have shirts printed up for the show that say trenches, trenches, trenches. He says, if we're serious about building a winner, give me the big men in the trenches.
Yep.
We agree. We absolutely agree. So,
and I know we're about to get out of here.
I think the Falcons are pretty good on the offensive line. They need more on the DL.
Yeah, we'll see about right tackle is interesting. Not really the draft to stock up on the tackle spot. Maybe there's some depth guys, Scott. We'll have a chance to get into that. You have somebody showing me before the show. The Athletic, who I would think they do a really good football podcast. They had one of their longtime former hosts on, and Nate Tyson. They do a show that's your big takeaways from the final 4 teams this season. And pretty much their 2 biggest takeaways were offensive line. Pretty much gives you whatever you want to call offensively if you're good enough on the offensive line, more so than having an elite quarterback even. So that was a big takeaway, and they tied that into the running game. And the last one was defensive line. All these teams that are left standing, They all have these premium picks across the board, depth, rotation, can throw waves at you with different body types and skill set on the defensive line. Didn't talk about cornerbacks, safety, linebackers, pass catchers, anything. It was pretty much trench-oriented.
Trenches.
It's all built on that. Everything else, you talk about the Raiders taking Genty. They're horrible running. I think they got good offensive line infrastructure. But that's kind of like adding a cherry on top of a piece of bread, right? It's like that's the finishing touch. You just barely start
the cherry and throw the bread away.
Yeah, what are we doing? So it's, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, it'll be fun. It's a fun process. Not in a spectacular superstar top of the draft this year, which kind of stinks for picking 15, but still going to have a chance. And this is where, guys are going to separate themselves also, separating the talent.
No, the key here is after this draft, we should be, famous last words, Scott, excited about seeing these guys next year. I had zero of that last year, zero. Just knowing that, hey, if Kirk Cousins gets hurt, you've got to, or, falls off a cliff, you got a rookie that you might be able to see. But that wasn't the plan by any stretch of the imagination. So we're going to get out of here. Appreciate y'all being here. If you want to keep the conversation going, we're going to go over to youtube.com/milehighhuddle. Otherwise, we will see you on Wednesday. We'll probably start delving into free agents a little bit. I will have the next 2 days to go through some of the skill guys, defensive backs, et cetera, because cornerback and safety, defensive back is a huge need for this Atlanta Falcons team. Appreciate you being here. Wear your jackets and your sunscreen. It's going to be one of those days today in the ATL. Y'all have a great day. Appreciate you being here. See you next time.
Peace.